I never thought my own father would stand there in silence and watch his new wife throw my plate of dinner into the trash, just because I dared to sit down at the table at the same time as her. Real family. But that exact moment was the beginning of the most hellish month of my life. Right now, as I sit in my room packing my things, I can still hear her voice ringing in my ears. She told my father that the mere sight of me ruined her children's appetite, and he just nodded, not even lifting his eyes to look at me. My name is Ethan, I'm 18, and just 6 months ago my life was completely different, right up until Linda walked into our house with her 2 spoiled kids, Toby and Sarah. My mom passed away a year and a half ago, and I honestly thought my dad deserved to be happy again, but I had no idea that his happiness would be built on my total psychological destruction. It all started quite mundanely. Linda moved in 3 months after meeting my father, and at first, she was just tidying up, which really meant throwing away my old belongings and photos of my mom that supposedly created a heavy aura. My father, Mark, was working 2 jobs to keep up with the bills and seemed so blinded by this woman's attention that he simply stopped noticing anything else happening under his own roof. The evening everything finally went off the rails, I had just gotten back from my shift at a local diner, exhausted and starving, hoping to just eat and go to bed. They were already in the kitchen, Linda, her kids, and my father, who looked like a man under some kind of spell. I served myself a portion of lasagna, which I had bought with my own money the day before, and sat down in the empty chair next to my father. Silence fell instantly, a silence so thick you could practically feel it pressing against your skin. Linda slowly put her fork down, looked at Toby and Sarah, who immediately made faces as if they had seen something disgusting, and then she turned her gaze toward Mark. She didn't scream. She said it in that ice-cold, calm tone that is honestly more terrifying than shouting. "Mark, we agreed that family time is just for us, and Ethan needs to understand that his presence here is unnecessary. He's a grown man and shouldn't be disturbing the children while they enjoy a quiet dinner." I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth, waiting for my dad to say something like, "Linda, this is his home. What are you even talking about?" But he just pushed his own plate away and said in a low voice, "Ethan, maybe you could eat in your room? The kids are tired today. There's no need to create extra tension." I looked at him and didn't recognize the person sitting there. This was my father, the man who taught me to always stand up for my own, who cried with me at my mom's funeral, and now he was asking me to leave the kitchen of my own house so I wouldn't bother someone else's children. When I tried to protest, Linda simply stood up, grabbed my plate, and with one swift motion, scraped the entire meal into the trash can, adding that if I didn't respect her rules, then I wouldn't be eating at this table at all. That incident happened exactly 3 weeks ago, and since that day, my life has turned into a series of humiliations that my father chooses to ignore. Linda started controlling my every move, how much time I spend in the shower, how much electricity I use in my room, and even what food I take from the fridge, despite the fact that I pay for most of my groceries myself. She began methodically pushing me out of the space that belonged to me by right. Toby and Sarah, seeing their mother's support, started acting even more bold. They would walk into my room, take my things, or just scatter trash on my bed, knowing that if I even touched them or raised my voice, Linda would throw a massive scene in front of my father, accusing me of aggression and being mentally unstable. I tried to talk to my dad privately. I caught him in the garage last Saturday while he was fixing the car. I told him, "Dad, look at what's happening. She's literally forcing me out of the house. You have to see that this isn't right." He didn't even turn around, kept tinkering with the engine, and just grumbled, "Ethan, you're an adult now. You're 18. It's time you learn how to get along with people. Linda is trying for all of us, and you're just creating problems with your selfishness." In that moment, I realized I was completely alone in this house, which had long stopped being my sanctuary. Every day of this month, I wake up with a heavy weight in my chest, wondering what new way to torment me Linda will come up with today. She has started hinting to my father that my earnings from my part-time job should go into a general family budget, which she, of course, manages. But the scariest part wasn't the money. It was the way she looked at me, like I was a weed that needed to be ripped out by the roots. She didn't just want me to eat separately. She wanted me to stop existing in their new, perfect reality. And I didn't know yet that her next move would be much bigger, targeting the only things I had left of my mother. The second week of this month felt like walking through a minefield where I was the only one who didn't have a map. Every time I stepped out of my bedroom, I could feel Linda's eyes on me, tracking my movements, calculating how much air I was breathing. It wasn't just about the dinner anymore. It was about making sure I knew that every square inch of this house was now her territory. She started implementing house rules that were clearly designed for a 10-year-old, not an 18-year-old man who works 25 hours a week while finishing his final semester. I had a curfew of 9 p.m. If I was a minute late, she would lock the deadbolt, and I'd have to sit on the porch until my father came home from his late shift to let me in, while she watched from the window with a look of pure satisfaction. Last Tuesday, I came home and found my bedroom door wide open. I'm very particular about my privacy, especially since Toby and Sarah think that sharing a home means they can take whatever they want. I walked in and saw Linda standing by my closet, holding a cardboard box. In that box were the few things I had left of my mom, her old journals, some dried flowers from her favorite garden, and a small wooden jewelry box that didn't even have anything expensive in it, just some costume jewelry she used to wear. Linda looked at me, not even startled that I caught her, and said, "Ethan, this room is a fire hazard with all this junk. I'm moving these to the garage." Toby needs a dedicated play area, and we're thinking of converting this space into his gaming room since he's growing so fast. I felt a heat in my chest that I can't even describe. It wasn't just anger, it was a physical pain, like someone was squeezing my lungs. I snatched the box out of her hands and told her to get out. I didn't yell, but my voice was shaking. I told her she had no right to touch my mother's things. She didn't argue. She just gave me this small, pitying smile, the kind you give to a stray dog that's about to be put down, and walked out without saying a word. 10 minutes later, my father called me. He wasn't even home yet. She had already texted him a distorted version of what happened. He told me on the phone that I was being hostile, and that Linda was just trying to help me declutter. He told me I needed to apologize to her for my outburst if I wanted to keep living there rent-free. That's when the financial pressure started. On Wednesday morning, I found a typed-out invoice on the kitchen counter. Linda had calculated the market rate for my bedroom, a portion of the electricity, water, and even a convenience fee for the internet. The total was nearly $800 a month. I only make about $1,100 at the diner after taxes. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to drain my savings so I wouldn't have enough to move out or pay for the community college classes I was planning to start in the fall. When I showed the paper to my dad, he just sighed and rubbed his face. He looked so old and tired, but instead of standing up for me, he said, "Ethan, times are tough. Linda is right. You're an adult now. If you were living anywhere else, you'd be paying way more. It's only fair you contribute to the family." The word family felt like a slap in the face. I spent the next few days working double shifts, trying to stay out of the house as much as possible. I was exhausted, barely sleeping, and eating granola bars in my car because I couldn't face the humiliation of the kitchen anymore. But the worst part was the psychological game. Toby and Sarah started, accidentally, breaking my things. My headphones were snapped in half. My favorite hoodie, which was a gift from my mom, ended up in the trash covered in bleach. When I brought the ruined hoodie to Linda, she just shrugged and said, "Laundry accidents happen, Ethan. Maybe if you did your own wash instead of leaving it for me, this wouldn't happen." I do my own wash. She had gone into the laundry room while I was at work and poured bleach into the machine. I started realizing that she wasn't just a mean stepmother. This was a calculated campaign to break me down until I either left with nothing or snapped so hard that my father would have no choice but to kick me out. She was whispering in his ear every night. I could hear them through the thin walls, her voice soft and manipulative, telling him how I was poisoning the atmosphere, how the children were scared of my temper, and how I was a reminder of a past he needed to move on from. Hearing my father agree with her, even just by staying silent, hurt more than any of her insults. He was choosing a lie over his own son. But there's something they don't know. There's a reason I'm fighting so hard to stay in this house specifically, beyond just having nowhere else to go. My mom was smarter than people gave her credit for, and she knew my father's weaknesses better than anyone. I've been digging through some old papers I managed to hide before Linda could declutter them, and I'm starting to see a picture of our family finances that doesn't match the story Linda is telling. There's a secret about this house and the life insurance money that my father hasn't mentioned, and I think Linda knows about it, which is why she's so desperate to get me out before I turn 19 next month. The tension in the house is so thick now that I can barely breathe. Every meal I eat alone in my room feels like a countdown. I'm watching them, and they're watching me. Linda thinks she's won because she's turned my father against me, but she doesn't realize how much I'm willing to endure to protect what's actually mine. I just need to survive 2 more weeks. The third week was when the psychological warfare turned into a full-blown siege. It wasn't just that I had to eat in my room anymore. It was that Linda had officially declared the kitchen a restricted zone for me during what she called prime family hours. She actually went out and bought a physical lock for the pantry and put a chain around the refrigerator handle. She told my father it was to track the grocery budget better, but we all knew the truth. Whenever I came home from work, I had to ask her for the key if I wanted to eat anything that wasn't a dry protein bar I kept hidden under my mattress. One evening, I was so hungry I didn't wait for her to finish her meditation in the living room, and I tried to grab a piece of bread. She caught me, and the scream she let out was so piercing I thought someone had been physically attacked. My father came running, and before I could say a word, she was pointing at me, shaking, saying that I was intimidating her and stalking the kitchen like a predator. Then came the dinner rule escalation. We had some of Linda's distant relatives over, people I had never met. I thought that maybe, for the sake of appearances, I'd be allowed to sit at the table and act like a normal human being. I dressed decently and walked into the dining room. The table was set beautifully, with the good china that used to be my mom's. As soon as I pulled out a chair, the entire room went silent. Linda didn't even look at her guests. She looked straight at my father and said, "Mark, we discussed this. The children's digestion is very sensitive, and having Ethan here, well, you know how he gets. He ruins the appetite of everyone at this table with that look on his face." Toby, who is only 10 but already a master of cruelty, started fake gagging and pushed his plate away, saying, "Mom, I feel sick. Make him go away." My father didn't even have the courage to look at me. He just stared at his napkin and whispered, "Ethan, please. Not tonight. Just take a plate to the basement or your room. Don't make a scene." I stood there for a good 10 seconds, feeling the heat rise to my face, staring at these strangers who were watching me like I was some kind of diseased animal. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around and walked out, but as I was leaving, I heard Linda loudly tell her relatives, "He's been so difficult since his mother passed. We're really trying our best to help him, but he's just so resentful." That was the moment I realized they weren't just trying to get me out. They were actively destroying my reputation so that when they finally threw me on the street, no one in our social circle or family would offer me a place to stay. They were painting me as the villain in a story I was barely allowed to participate in. The money situation got even worse. The $800 rent was due, and when I went to my secret stash in my closet, a small metal box where I kept my tips, it was empty. Nearly $300 was gone. I knew for a fact Toby had been in my room, but when I confronted Linda, she turned it back on me. She accused me of mismanaging my finances and told my father that I was probably spending the money on substances and then lying about it to get out of paying rent. My father, who used to trust me with everything, actually demanded to see my bank statements. He stood there in the hallway, looking through my transactions on my phone, while Linda stood behind him with this smug, victorious expression. When he didn't find anything suspicious, he didn't apologize. He just said, "Well, you must have lost it then. You still owe us the full amount by Friday, or we're going to have to discuss your living arrangements." The tension was so high I could barely function at work. I was making mistakes, dropping orders, and my boss was starting to notice. I felt like I was being squeezed from both sides. One night, I stayed up late, waiting for the house to go quiet. I needed to find those papers I had seen earlier, the ones about the house title. I crept down to the basement where my dad keeps his old filing cabinet. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I found the folder marked Estate. As I flipped through the pages, I found the deed to the house. It wasn't just in my father's name. It was in a trust. My mother had set it up so that the house couldn't be sold or significantly altered without my consent once I turned 19. And the most shocking part? There was a clause stating that if my father remarried, a portion of the equity, about 40%, was supposed to be moved into a savings account for my education immediately. He hadn't done it. He had kept the money to fund Linda's lifestyle, her kids' private tutoring, and the new car she was driving. He was literally stealing my inheritance to pay for the people who were treating me like trash. Just as I was putting the paper back, I heard the basement door creak. I froze. The light flickered on, and there was Linda, standing at the top of the stairs. She wasn't wearing her sweet mask anymore. She looked at me with a cold, predatory intensity. "I knew you were a little rat," she hissed, her voice low so my father wouldn't hear. "You think those papers matter?" "Why?" "Our father signed over his power of attorney to me last week. I own this house now, Ethan. And I'm going to make sure that by the time you turn 19 next week, you won't have a cent or a roof over your head. I'll tell him you tried to hit me. I'll make sure he hates the very memory of you." I realized then that this wasn't just a family squabble. This was a war for my future. She had already moved the pieces, and I was one step away from losing everything my mother had worked for. The ruined appetite comment was just a distraction. She was trying to break my spirit so I wouldn't have the strength to fight for what was legally mine. I had exactly 7 days until my birthday, and I knew that if I didn't act fast, the next time I saw the inside of this house, it would be from the sidewalk while my belongings were being tossed out of the window. I went back to my room, locked the door, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I started making a list of everyone who still remembered my mother. The morning after the basement confrontation, I woke up to the sound of a drill. I ran to the hallway and saw a man I didn't recognize changing the locks on the front door. Linda was standing there, sipping coffee, watching him work like she was supervising a construction site. My father was nowhere to be seen. When I asked what was going on, she didn't even look at me. She just pointed to a single suitcase sitting by the door. Your father and I decided that your aggressive behavior last night was the final straw, she said, her voice completely flat. We don't feel safe with you in the house. Your things are in the garage. You have 1 hour to clear them out before I call the police for trespassing. I tried to call my dad. It went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, but he had blocked my number. I realized she must have taken his phone while he was in the shower or convinced him to do it. I felt a cold, numb sensation spreading through my limbs. I was 18 years old. I had about $400 left in my bank account because she had stolen my cash, and I was being kicked out of my own home 6 days before I turned 19. I didn't scream. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I grabbed my suitcase, went to the garage, and loaded as much as I could into my old car. I spent the next 2 nights sleeping in the parking lot of the diner where I work. My back ached, and I smelled like old fry oil, but I spent every spare second on my phone. I didn't go to the police yet. I went to see Mr. Henderson. He was an old friend of my mom's, a lawyer who had helped her set up the trust years ago. I met him in a small coffee shop because I couldn't afford a formal consultation fee. I showed him the photos I had taken of the deed and the trust documents in the basement. I expected him to tell me we could just sue her and everything would be fine. Instead, Mr. Henderson looked at the papers, sighed, and pushed his glasses up his nose. Ethan, he said, his voice full of a pity that made me want to throw up. There's something you don't see here. These documents show that a large portion of the trust's liquidity was withdrawn 8 months ago. It wasn't just moved to a different account. It was signed off by your father, but it required your signature as well since you were over 18 at the time of the withdrawal. I stared at him. I never signed anything, Mr. Henderson. I didn't even know the money was available yet. He looked me dead in the eye. Then your father forged your signature, Ethan. He didn't just mismanage the money. He committed identity theft and fraud against his own son to get his hands on that cash. Linda likely found out about it, and that's how she's been controlling him. She's not just his wife, she's his blackmailer. If she goes to the authorities with proof of the forgery, your dad goes to prison for a long time. That's why he's doing everything she says. She's probably forcing him to sign the house over to her right now to keep her quiet. The world felt like it was tilting. My father, the man who held me while I cried for my mother, had stolen my future to satisfy this woman, and now he was a prisoner of his own crime. Mr. Henderson told me I had 2 choices. I could report the fraud, which would automatically freeze all the assets and stop the transfer of the house, but it would mean sending my father to a federal penitentiary. Or I could walk away, let Linda take the house, and let my father live in whatever hell she created for him. I had 48 hours until my 19th birthday, the day the trust was supposed to fully vest, and the day the house transfer was scheduled to be finalized. I spent those hours in a state of total dissociation. I watched my father from a distance. I saw him come out of a lawyer's office with Linda. He looked like a ghost. He had lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and he looked like he was about to collapse. Linda was beaming, holding a folder tightly against her chest. She looked like she had just won the lottery. On the night before my birthday, I drove back to the house. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway and watched the lights in the kitchen. I saw them sitting there, Linda, Toby, and Sarah, eating dinner. My father was sitting at the head of the table, but he wasn't eating. He was just staring at the wall. I realized then that Linda hadn't just replaced me. She was erasing him too. Once the house was in her name, she wouldn't need him anymore. She'd find a way to get rid of him, or she'd keep him there as a servant in his own home, just like she had tried to do to me. I took out my phone and looked at the contact for the local sheriff's office. My thumb hovered over the call button. If I pressed it, I'd get my money back. I'd get the house back. I'd have enough to go to college and start the life my mom wanted for me. But I would be the one who put the handcuffs on my father. I thought about the ruined appetite comment. I thought about the bleach on my mom's hoodie. I thought about my father's silence in the garage. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my mother's jewelry box, the one Linda had taken. It was sitting in a trash can outside the house, right next to a pile of old newspapers. The caption read, "Forgot to take the rest of your junk. Pickup ends at midnight." That was it. That was the moment the last bit of hesitation died. I realized there was no family left to save. There was only a predator and a man who had chosen to be her accomplice. But as I started to dial, I saw my father walk out onto the porch. He looked around, saw my car, and for a split second, our eyes met through the windshield. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just stood there, waiting to see what I would do. The clock on my dashboard flipped to 11:58 p.m. In 2 minutes, I would be 19. I got out of the car, the cold night air hitting my face, and walked toward the trash can at the end of the driveway. I reached in and grabbed my mother's jewelry box. It was sticky with something, probably soda, that Toby had poured over it, but it was intact. I didn't go back to my car. I walked straight to the front door. I didn't knock. I knew they had changed the locks, but I also knew that the garage door keypad had the same code we had used for 10 years, my mother's birthday. My father had been too distracted or too sentimental to change that one thing. I punched in the numbers, the light turned green, and I walked into the house through the mudroom. The kitchen was quiet, but the light was still on. Linda and my father were sitting at the table, surrounded by papers. They both jumped when I walked in. Linda's face went from shock to pure, unadulterated rage in a second. She stood up, her chair screeching against the tile. "I told you I'd call the police, Ethan. You are trespassing. Get out before I finish dialing." She had her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. My father didn't move. He just looked at me with those hollowed-out eyes, looking like a man who had already accepted his execution. "Go ahead, Linda. Call them," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I pulled out my phone and laid it on the table. "While they're coming, we can talk about the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We can talk about the $120,000 you and Mark withdrew from my trust 8 months ago using a forged signature. Mr. Henderson has the original documents and the bank records. He also has a statement from me saying I never authorized a single cent of that withdrawal. So, if the cops show up, they aren't just taking me for trespassing. They're taking Dad for felony fraud and identity theft. And since you're the one who's been spending that money on your new car and your kids' tuition, you're an accessory." The room went dead silent. Linda's hand started to shake, and she slowly lowered her phone. She looked at my father, expecting him to say something, to deny it, to fix it. But he just put his head in his hands and started to sob. It wasn't a loud, dramatic cry. It was the sound of a man who had finally broken under the weight of his own cowardice. "I was going to put it back, Ethan," he choked out through his fingers. "She said we needed it. She said it was for the family. I thought I could replace it before you turned 19. You didn't think that, Dad. You just did what she told you to do because you were afraid to be alone," I said. I looked at Linda. The smugness was gone. She looked small, cornered, and dangerous. I took a deep breath. Here is how this is going to work. It's my birthday now. It's midnight. I am 19 years old. This trust is fully mine. Mr. Henderson has a restated deed and a settlement agreement ready for your signatures. You are going to sign the house over to me entirely. You are going to move out by the end of the week. In exchange, I won't file charges. I won't send my father to prison. You get to keep the car and whatever money is left in your personal accounts. But you are leaving this house, and you are never contacting me again." Linda tried to laugh, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "You can't do that. Mark, tell him he can't do that. This is our home." But my father just looked up at her, and for the first time in a month, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be. He looked at her with total disgust. He realized that the woman he had betrayed his son for was the same woman who was about to let him go to jail just to keep a house she didn't own. "Give me the pen, Ethan," he said. The next 3 days were a blur of legal meetings and boxes. Linda screamed, she cursed, she tried to break things on her way out, but I stood there and watched her. I watched Toby and Sarah carry their toys to the car, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, just a hollow sense of relief. When it was finally time for them to leave, my father stood by the door. He looked at me, hoping for a hug, a handshake, some kind of sign that things would eventually be okay. I just held the door open for him. "I can't forgive you for what you did, Dad. You chose her over Mom's memory, and you chose her over me. I'm keeping the house because it's the only thing left of our family that hasn't been poisoned. You should go." He didn't say anything. He just walked out to the car where Linda was waiting, honking the horn. I watched the taillights fade as they drove down the street. It has been exactly 1 month since that first dinner where she threw my plate in the trash. The house is empty now. Most of the furniture is gone because she claimed it was hers, and I didn't care enough to fight for it. I'm sitting on the floor of my mother's old office, holding her jewelry box. I won. I have the house. I have the legal victory. But as I sit here in the silence, I realize that the person I was a month ago, the kid who just wanted to finish school and have a normal life, is gone. Money and property can be recovered, and legal documents can be signed, but you can't unsee the moment your own father decides you are expendable. I have a roof over my head and a future ahead of me, but I'm 19 years old, and I've learned the hardest lesson there is. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are just the people who haven't found a high enough price for you yet. I'm not sure if I'm lucky or just the last person standing in a house full of ghosts. I think I'll stay here for a while, just to see if the silence eventually feels like peace or if it just stays this heavy forever.